NBC's Gabe Gutierrez is outside the DA's office in Manhattan. NBC's Ali Vitale is in Orlando, where House Republicans are gathered for a retreat. NBC's Vaughn Hilliard is in West Palm Beach, Florida, near President Trump's Mar-a-Lago home. And also with us is former federal prosecutor and NBC News legal analyst Carol Lam. Thanks so much to all of you for being with me today and starting us off on this incredibly busy day and week. Gabe, I want to start with you. As we laid out at the top, Robert Costello testifying today before the grand jury. What are you hearing about what's happening behind you?
Well, hi there, Kristen. Good afternoon. Well, yes, Robert Costello came here just a few hours ago in a vehicle, did not stop the comment, but as you mentioned, Kristen, he is expected to testify that Michael Cohen, who he was a former legal advisor to, that Cohen is a liar and convicted perjurer, and he was here at the request of Mr. Trump's legal team. And Michael Cohen now standing by, we understand, inside that building as well as a rebuttal witness. But, Kristen, you mentioned that former President Trump over the weekend said that he would be arrested on Tuesday, called for protest. We do not know the exact timing of this grand jury investigation, but legal experts do say that it does appear as that it might be nearing its conclusion. Now, over the weekend, Kristen, we understand from several sources involved here in New York City that several law enforcement agencies are preparing for the very complicated logistics and security concerns that would involve the potential indictment of a former president of the United States. As you said, unprecedented in American politics. Just today, we've noticed an increased security presence here outside the district attorney's office, as well as some extra steel barricades that are being put up outside. But again, we have no indications on when this grand jury investigation might wrap up. But right now, what we do understand is that Robert Costello is back there testifying in front of the grand jury. That could continue potentially over the next several hours. Michael Cohen also in the building, potentially acting as a rebuttal witness. Kristen.
Well, Gabe, let me just quickly follow up with you about that, because, again, it's our expectation that Robert Costello is essentially testifying that Michael Cohen is a liar. What role do we think that Michael Cohen might play today? How impactful would that be?
Well, certainly, Kristen. Look, Michael Cohen has spent a lot of time here testifying, in front of the grand juries and meeting, 20 times with prosecutors throughout the course of this investigation. He is being brought here as a rebuttal witness because this is, of course, last minute. There was a time late last week, Kristen, where we were getting indications that this grand jury investigation might be wrapping up. Over the weekend, we got word that at the request of Mr. Trump's legal team, Robert Costello was coming here, and that, Robert Costello's testimony would essentially serve as a way to blow on the hole in the prosecution's star witness, undermining Michael Cohen's credibility. And the thinking being is that, Michael Cohen would be allowed to respond to any of the allegations that Robert Costello would put forth. Again, legal experts saying that this does indicate that we are getting closer and closer to a possible conclusion here, although we do not have any indications for certain that an indictment is imminent.
All right. Gabe Gutierrez in New York, in the center of it all. Gabe, thank you. Ali Vitale, let me turn to you in Orlando. You're there where Republicans are gathered for a retreat. What's the reaction that you're hearing when you talk to your sources there?
Look, Kristen, by and large, this is not a conference that was set up to be about Donald Trump, but that is definitely what this conference has become, because even you look at last night, House leadership on the Republican side did a press conference with reporters. It was an hour long. The first 30 minutes were topics that they were self-selecting. They were choosing to talk about their policy priorities, the things that they hope to do with the House Republican majority. And then when it got to reporter questions, almost all of them were around Donald Trump, this potential indictment, and, of course, the way that Trump himself has urged people to protest and, in Trump's own words, take our country back. This is language that is really a mirror image of the things that he was saying before January 6th. You can't think about this current moment and the preparations that are being made near where Gabe is without thinking about what Trump's words incited on the 6th. That's something that I asked McCarthy about yesterday, asking the speaker if he condoned those calls for protests. And this is what he told me. Watch.
I don't think people should protest this, no. And I think President Trump, if you talk to him, he doesn't believe that either. He's not talking in a harmful way, and nobody should. Nobody should harm one another in this. And this is why you should really make law equal, because if that was the case, nothing would happen here.
So McCarthy there, Kristen, acting as sort of a Trump interpreter, it seems, trying to explain away Trump's words, even though we can all read them plainly on paper. He was pressed again on the idea of January 6th looming over all of this, and he again just urged calmness and then pivoted back to the Republican talking point that we have heard time and again from not just people here at this House Republican retreat, but also on the campaign trail. The guy I also cover simultaneously, Ron DeSantis, here in the state of Florida, saying that this is political in nature. And what we're watching from the House Republican side of this is the ways that they're trying to churn on that and actually mount a counteroffensive that comes from the fact that they actually have the numbers in Congress.
Allie, let me follow up with you very quickly because House Republicans are calling on Alvin Bragg to come and testify. I want to read you a portion of their letter. It writes, You are reportedly about to engage in an unprecedented abuse of prosecutorial authority, the indictment of a former president of the United States and current declared candidate for that office. If these reports are accurate, your actions will erode confidence in the even-handed application of justice and unilaterally interfere in the course of the 2024 presidential election. Seems like they're accusing him of election interference. What are the implications of this? Where does this go from here, Allie?
Well, look, this is kind of what we're watching, right? Because Speaker McCarthy yesterday promised that there would be action through one of the committees that has been responsible for these sorts of investigations. And you see the names at the bottom of that letter. You've got three powerful committee chairmen, but the one that I'm looking at the most closely is Chairman Jim Jordan, not just because he's the head of the Judiciary Committee, but also because he's the head of the House Select Committee on what they're calling weaponization of government. This could nicely fit with that committee's detailed work as well. So we're going to watch to see which of these committees they actually ask Bragg to come before, or if this is some kind of joint investigation between admin, oversight, judiciary, and weaponization. This is the first step, though. It's an ask, not a subpoena. We'll see if it gets to the subpoena point.
All right. Well, I know you have got a busy rest of your afternoon. Allie Vitale, thank you so much for your great reporting there. Vaughn, let me turn to you in West Palm Beach. You've been talking to your sources there. What are they telling you about former President Trump's mood? This is obviously a moment that he sees as a potential rallying cry for his base.
Right, and actually I think that Donald Trump speaks for himself so well in this regard, Kristen, because if you were to go to his Truth social media account over the last 72 hours, he has consistently posted, most posts in all caps, frustrations with the investigation into him. Obviously, on Saturday is when he suggested that he was going to be arrested on Tuesday. There was no basis for that assertion because the district attorney's office had yet to even charge him with any alleged crimes. But for Donald Trump, over the course of these last 3 days, he has suggested not only that Michael Cohen is not a credible witness. Of course, there are a lot of layers to Michael Cohen as a human when we talk about him over the years and his cooperation and the extent to which he has cooperated with federal and local prosecutors, as well as the likes of the Manhattan District Attorney. But then he's also taken aim directly at Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan District Attorney. And just to give you an idea, earlier today in one particular post, he essentially suggested that Alvin Bragg is the one who should be investigated for, in his words, presidential election interference. Of course, making a play to the investigations that at one time surrounded Donald Trump in potential collusion with Russian individuals. And that's where Alvin Bragg, the focus has gone from not only Donald Trump, but also the House GOP, calling into question the veracity and what actually the prosecutors have against Donald Trump. Of course, if he were to be charged, this would go before a jury, and it would be up to that jury to decide whether Donald Trump was guilty or not.
But very quickly, because this is obviously not the only case swirling around the former president, and he's trying to actually get the grand jury in Atlanta squashed. What can you tell us about that? That may have the broader implications because the grand jury there is looking into efforts to overturn the results in Georgia.
Right. His attorneys in Georgia working specifically on that Fulton County District Attorney's investigation into alleged efforts by Donald Trump and others to overturn Georgia's 2020 election results. They filed with the courts today a 51-page filing in which they called for the special grand jury's report, which was completed earlier this year, that was a wide-ranging investigation in which there were multiple individuals, former associates of Donald Trump, Lindsey Graham, Graham, Rudy Giuliani, that sat with that special grand jury that came up with this report that now is in the hands of the Fulton County District Attorney as she decides whether to try to seek charges against Donald Trump and others. In that 51-page report, they say that the special grand jury's efforts were unconstitutional and that there were improprieties by Fani Willis in her own public statements, suggesting that this was politically motivated. Of course, that would ultimately come down to the courts to determine whether that has any standing or not, Kristen.
All right, Vaughn Hilliard in West Palm Beach, a very windy West Palm Beach. Thank you, Vaughn, for braving the wind for us. Carol Lam, so glad that we have you on a day like this to put this into broader perspective. There are still questions surrounding what exact criminal charges former President Trump may be facing. Do you have a sense of what he could actually be charged with here?
Well, the fact that the district attorney in Manhattan is using a grand jury suggests that he's going after a felony. You don't actually have to use a grand jury if you're only going to bring a misdemeanor charge. And in this case, the misdemeanor charge is the falsification of business records. That, in other words, the money that he paid or reimbursed Michael Cohen for the hush money paid to Stormy Daniels was put on the books as something else, as a legitimate legal expense, which, of course, paying hush money to a porn star is not. What turns it into a felony is if that payment is used in furtherance of or to conceal another crime. And that is the big question mark here. What is the district attorney, if that is the felony charge he's pursuing, what is he going to charge as that other crime? If it's a violation of federal election law, if it's a violation of state election law, or perhaps even concealment or misrepresentation on the organization's tax returns, that is also a possibility. So that is what would turn it into a felony charge. And we just don't have any information at this point what that charge is going to be.
Okay. We do know that Robert Costello, former Trump attorney, is there testifying before the grand jury today. What do you make of that? Is this a Hail Mary by the Trump team, or could this have a real impact? Could this change the ultimate decision that is made?
I think it is a little bit of a Hail Mary here. What the reports coming out is that he's basically going to call Michael Cohen a liar. We all know that Michael Cohen has lied in the past. We all know that he's been convicted of felonies. He's pled guilty to felonies, and he has served time. So this is what I would characterize likely as being an anti-character witness. In other words, someone that the defense has put forward as somebody they would like the grand jury to hear from, who will say that you have heard from an unsavory character and you should not believe what he says. That is their right under New York state law, and they are hearing from Mr. Costello right now and his opinion of Michael Cohen. But whether he is going to be able to contradict the corroborating evidence that the district attorney has for Michael Cohen's testimony, I think that's the key question that the grand jurors are going to have to decide.
You know, it's interesting, Carol, because House Speaker Kevin McCarthy called this the weakest of all cases. There is a sense in legal circles that the stronger case may be down in Georgia. What is your sense of that? I mean, is there any truth to what the House Speaker said?
You know, I don't know whether people are necessarily saying that the stronger case is in Georgia. They may be saying the more relevant and perhaps more important case is in Georgia, but the fact that a case may be more significant or more important does not necessarily mean that it is the best evidence case. But you know, the evidence in the Georgia case does consist in part of recorded telephone calls. So that is very strong evidence. But you have to look very closely at what the charges are and what the evidence is supporting those charges. And that differs between states. States don't necessarily all have the same laws. So it will be very interesting to see what transpires in Georgia as well.
And I want to ask you about the pressure that we are seeing from some of the former president's allies on prosecutors. As a former prosecutor yourself, have you ever experienced anything like it? Can you put it into context for us? And could it actually be a violation of the law in and of itself?
when there's an investigation going on, and if you are a prosecutor, there are certain things that you have to your advantage. You have grand jury proceedings that take place without the defendant there, without the defense counsel there, without even a judge there. You can do a lot of things in confidence, confidentially. It lets you move the investigation, usually without a lot of people knowing what's going on in the investigation. But the defense also has an advantage in that they can go out and say whatever they want, and they can say it publicly. So until an indictment is actually returned, most of what we hear is from the voice of the people representing the potential defendant. And I think it's important to bear that in mind. If and when indictments come out in either New York or Georgia, at that time, those district attorneys will be able to speak more about what is in those indictments.
All right, Carol Lam, thank you so much for your perspective. We really appreciate it. And before that, Gabe Gutierrez, Ali Vitale, and Vaughn Hilliard. Really appreciate all of you for getting us started.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.